Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more A Testament of Hope, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The piece we will be reading today is called Civil Right Number One, The Right to Vote. And the blurb reads, this article appeared in the Sunday, 14th of March 1963 issue of the New York Times. President Johnson delivered his historic address to his pending voting rights bill the next day. Few people in America realize the seriousness of the burden imposed upon our democracy by the disenfranchisement of Negroes in the Deep South. In Mississippi, only about 26,000 out of a voting age population of some 450,000 Negroes have been allowed to register. The situation in Alabama and Louisiana is almost as bad, though previous state administrations of a more liberal inclination did permit the registration of approximately 150,000 Negro voters in Louisiana and 111 in Alabama. In recent years, however, under Wallace in Alabama and former Governor Jimmy Davis of Louisiana, the plan has been to freeze Negro registration at a level which can be successfully negated by sure segregationist voting strength. This has led to a crisis not only for the Negro in the South, but for Negroes in the swollen ghettos of the North. Northern cities are inheriting the results of Northern indifference to Southern racism and exploitation as the victims of oppression migrate there in search of freedom. If they had had the ballot, Negroes might have had a chance to lead a decent life in their southern homelands where they owned small plots of land and participated in a stable pattern of community life that at least promised survival and a minimum of emotional security. This is more than is promised by the slums of New York, Chicago, and other cities, which are already teeming with the bitterness and constantly kept at boiling point by the misery of rats, filth, unemployment, and de facto segregation. But the evils of disenfranchisement burden our cities in other ways as well as by mass migration. Southern seniority in Congress, resting as it does on the whites only ballot box, maintains power in the hands of our nation's most reactionary politicians. Bills providing for the welfare of our nation, from Medicare to education, must run the gauntlet of Southern power before they are enacted, and many never are. Voting as a badge of full citizenship has always had a special meaning to the Negro, but in 1965, the denial of the right to vote cuts painfully and deeply into his new sense of personal dignity. It is salt on his wounded pride. For today he looks beyond the borders of his own land and sees the decolonization and liberation of Africa and Asia. He sees colonized people, yellow, black, and brown, ruling over their own new nations. He sees colored statesmen voting on vital issues of war and peace at the United Nations at a time when he is not even permitted to vote for the office of sheriff in his local county. In 1964, however, the Negro voter participated in a significant partner to a ballot landslide that repudiated a Republican Party which had allowed itself to be captured by racism and reaction. He was the key to the Democratic victory in several southern states, and he thereby proved that voting is more than a badge of citizenship and dignity. It is an effective tool for change. Voting is the foundation stone for political action. With the Negro with it, the Negro can eventually vote out of office public officials who bar the doorway to decent housing, public safety, jobs, and decent integrated education. It is now obvious that the basic elements so vital to the Negro advancement can only be achieved by seeking redress from government at local, state, and federal levels. To do this, the vote is essential. When the full power of the ballot is available to my people, it will not be exercised merely to advance our cause alone. We have learned in the course of our freedom struggle that the needs of 20 million Negroes are not truly separable from those of nearly 200 million whites and Negroes in America, all of whom will benefit from a colorblind land of plenty that provides for the nourishment of each man's body, mind, and spirit. Our vote would place in Congress true representatives of the people who would legislate for the Medicare, housing, schools, and jobs required by all men of any color. In Selma, Alabama, thousands of Negroes are courageously providing dramatic witness to the evil forces that bar our way to the all important ballot box. They are laying bare for all the nation to see, for all the world to know, the nature of segregationist resistance. The ugly pattern of denial flourishes with insignificant differences in thousands of Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and other southern communities. Once it is exposed and challenged by the marching feet of Negro citizens, the nation will take action to cure this cancerous sore. What is malignant in Selma must be moved by congressional surgery so that all citizens may freely exercise their right to vote without delays, harassment, economic intimidation, and police brutality. Selma is to 1965 what Birmingham was to 1963. The pattern of denial depends upon four main roadblocks. First, there is the Gestapo like control of county and local government in the South by the likes of Sheriff Jim Clark of Selma, Alabama, and Sheriff Rainey in Philadelphia, Mississippi. There is carefully cultivated mystique behind the power and brutality of these men. The gun, the club, and the cattle prod reinforce the fear that is the main barrier to voting, a barrier erected by 345 years' exposure to the psychology of brutality of slavery. and legal segregation. It is a fear rooted in the feelings of inferiority, but the fear is also real, as the broken bodies and bloodied heads of citizens in Selma and Marion bear witness, and the snakes placed on people standing in line were not hallucinations, as hundreds, including the press, can testify. Nor was it a sick imagination that conjured up the vision of a public official sworn to uphold the law, who forced an inhuman march upon hundreds of Negro children, who ordered the Reverend James Bevel to be chained to his sick bed, who clubbed a Negro woman registrant, and who callously inflicted repeated brutalities and indignities upon nonviolent Negroes peacefully petitioning for their constitutional right to vote. Would a fiction writer have the temerity to invent a character wearing a sheriff's badge at the head of a helmeted posse who punched a clergyman in the mouth and then proudly boasted, "If I hit him, I don't know it"? One of the first things I ever learned was not to hit a nigger with your fist because his head is too hard. Of course, the camera might make me out to be a liar. I do have a sore finger. Yet, such a man actually exists in Sheriff Clark. He was voted into office in Dallas County by an electorate that includes only 300 or 635 out of 15,000 Negroes of voting age. In contrast, out of the 14,440 whites of voting age, 9,543 have been registered. So far, 3,400 Negroes have been arrested in Selma, placing 10 times as many in Selma jails as are on the voters' rolls. The second factor in the pattern of Negro disenfranchisement is the abuse of local and state laws to impede the exercise of suffrage rights. Southern officials, knowing they cannot jail citizens for seeking the right to vote, instead claim that Negroes are guilty of other offenses. In Selma, for instance, there are 300,000 arrests that have been made on such charges as breach of peace, contempt of court, disorderly conduct, unlawful assembly, contributing to the delinquency of minors, and criminal provocation. Aside from the obvious intimidation involved in the arrest and jail, 3,000 Negro citizens now face years of expensive and frustrating litigation before these charges are defeated and their right to vote vindicated. After so many years of intimidation, the Negro community has learned that its salvation lies in united action. When one Negro stands up, he is run out of town. But when 1,000 stand up, the situation is drastically altered. Abuse of the law by local police power is expressly designed to frustrate such united action, and so long as these mass arrests are made on trumped up charges, the path to the registrar's office is obstructed. The third factor is abridging Negro voting rights in the registrar himself, administering complex registration procedures designed specifically to slow up and frustrate Negro applicants. As Burke Marshall, the former Assistant Attorney General in charge of Civil Rights Division, has pointed out, the Negro voting problem is more than a legal issue, for it takes courage, patience, and massive effort before a significant number of Negro residents are ready to break the pattern of their lives by attempting to register to vote. And when the effort is unsuccessful because of discrimination, delay, intimidation, or of the failure of Negro applicants themselves, the promised federal rights again become illusory. Where the will to keep Negro registration to a minimum is strong, Mr. Marshall said, the latitude for discrimination is almost endless. The delaying practices that can be used are virtually infinite. Using them, the white hierarchy of Selma has succeeded in limiting Negro registration to the snail's pace of about 145 persons a year. At this rate, it would take about 103 years to register the 15,000 eligible Negro voters of Dallas County, not counting those who will reach voting age in that period or who may move into the county. A weapon for delay is the decision to open the registration office on only 2 days per month. Long lines of Negroes have waited without success merely to enter the office to apply for registration. After 13 private and government lawsuits were instituted, however, minimal corrective measures were ordered by Judge Daniel H. Thomas of the Federal District Court of Mobile. Although he found a pattern of discrimination, he refused to order the registrar's office to open more frequently. Instead, he set up a new procedure containing many of the same seeds of discouragement and frustration. Negroes seeking to register may sign up in a public appearance sheet, and a federal voting referee has now been appointed to process the applications. In the meantime, every Negro who has signed the appearance sheet must be ready to endure an ordeal by economic retaliation and personal intimidation, perfected by racists over many decades. It is a shining tribute to Negro determination, therefore, that despite this harassment, including being made to wait in the pouring rain, 266 persons, most of them Negroes, completed their registration applications in Selma on March the 1st, an all-time record for the county. But it must also be said that the concept of a federal referee appointed by the court looks good only on the surface. We happen to know something, for instance, about the referee appointed for adjacent Perry County. He has just about as discriminatory a record as the county appointed registrar, and we are already contesting his pattern of misconduct. He is a native of Greene County, which is also in the Black Belt and has as bitter a heritage of segregation as Perry and Dallas counties, with even fewer Negroes registered. Moreover, the appointment of a voting referee provides no assurance of speedy processing for the thousands of applications that will flood his office. The Act of 1960 that permitted the courts to appoint referees allows for a legal challenge to each person registered by the referee and thus offers ample opportunities for delay, which is the key to Southern tactics. Delays feed the dangers that beset Negroes. Every day means more murder and brutality, more suffering from inferior education, more dreary hours in the long night of economic exploitation, and more of the deadly despair brought on by personal humiliation. The whole program of delay can be appreciated if one recognizes that the white community is almost 100% registered and eligible to vote, whereas Negro voters are added almost one by one to the voters' roll. If it takes a century more to redeem the 15th Amendment's promise, the white Southern official could not care less. The fourth roadblock on the way to Negro suffrage is the literacy test, administered by the registrars and designed to be difficult. The Justice Department has been able to establish in hundreds of counties that these tests are not administered fairly. There are many instances of fair skinned Negroes and white persons being helped to register, while in Selma, ministers and teachers have been rejected 6 and 7 times. An interesting sidelight on, on this is that Selma's deputy registrar handed out 20 or more vouchers for prospective voters on which the word was spelled VOCHER. Although a federal court has now ordered Selma to scrap a most technical and difficult literacy test, the order applies only to Selma, so that the legal battle will have to be waged county by county. Again, time is the enemy operating on the side of the white only ballot box. It is surely ironical that the states which have labored so diligently to keep the Negro masses ignorant through the inferior segregated education now require literacy as a prerequisite for voting. You hardly need much formal training to know who, as sheriff, will treat you like a human being and who will crack your skull. The deliberate nature of our legal process is being abused. Legal redress for Negroes details expensive court actions whose victories are the signal not for the capitulation of segregationists, but rather for further bouts with new delaying tactics. Even the recent action of the Attorney General in Alabama to strike at statewide measures, while welcome, cannot bring redress here and now. The delays inherent in these test cases where the U.S. Supreme Court must ultimately rule make sadly pertinent the comment of Chief Justice Earl Warren in the school desegregation cases. Justice delayed is justice denied. Clearly, the heart of the voting problem lies in the fact that the machinery for enforcing the basic right is in the hands of the state appointed officials answerable to the very people who believe they can continue to wield power in the South only so long as the Negro is disenfranchised. No matter how many loopholes are plugged, no matter how many segregation or how many irregularities are exposed, It is plain that the federal government must withdraw this control from the states or else set up machinery for policing it effectively. The patchwork reforms brought about by the laws of 1957, 1960, and 1964 have helped, but the denial of suffrage has gone on too long, has caused too deep a hurt for Negroes to wait out the time required by slow, piecemeal enforcement procedures. What is needed is the new voting rights legislation promised for this session of Congress. As I told our people in Dallas County 2 weeks ago, we are going to bring a voting bill into being in the streets of Selma. President Johnson has a mandate from the American people. He must go out and get a voting bill this time that will end the necessity for any more voting bills. Certainly, no community in the history of the Negro struggle has responded with the enthusiasm of Selma and her neighboring town of Marion, Alabama, where Birmingham depended largely upon students and unemployed adults. Selma has involved fully 40% of the Negro population in active demonstrations, and at least half the Negro population of Marion was arrested on one day. Seldom has there been so complete a representation of every facet of community life. Teachers and students, clergy and laity, all joined the long march of freedom. This is significant because it means that once the demonstrations are over, a limited political organization will be left in being to direct the drive for votes and other rights. This could well be the pattern of the future, for it is plain that the 1964 Civil Rights Act has given new confidence to the nonviolent movement. But it is also clear that the voting sections of the existing act are inadequate, as I have stressed in my recent meetings with President Johnson. I urge Congress to enact a voting rights bill, including these basic principles. 1. Registration machinery so automatic that it eliminates varying standards and undue discretion on the part of hostile state registrars and requires only elementary biographical details from applicants. This was recommended by the U.S. Civil Rights Commission after it completed its studies in Alabama, Louisiana, and the Black Belt. 2. The abolition of literacy tests in those areas where Negroes have been disadvantaged by generations of inferior, segregated education. 3. Application of the law to all elections, federal and state, and especially to local elections for sheriffs, school boards, etc. 4. Enforcement of the law by federal registrars appointed by and responsible to the president. 5. Such legislation, while directed against oppressive areas like Selma, must be versatile enough to overcome more sophisticated resistance in cities like New Orleans, Chicago, New York, or Miami. One of the difficult lessons we have learned is that you cannot depend upon American institutions to function without pressure. Any real change in the status quo depends on the continued creative action to sharpen the conscience of the nation and establish a climate in which even the most recalcitrant elements are forced to admit that change is necessary. To this end, we are committed to keep up the pressure for the adoption of a Civil Rights Act of 1965. We know that Americans of goodwill have learned that no nation can long continue to flourish or to find its way to a better society while it allows any one of its citizens, let alone vast numbers in 11 southern states, to be denied the right to participate in the most fundamental of all privileges of democracy, the right to vote. At a time when the Supreme Court has said that the law of the land demands one man, one vote, so that all state legislatures may be democratically structured. It would be a mockery indeed if this were not followed without delay by an insistence upon one vote for every man. So, yeah. First, let me apologize for the use of the ugly word I had to use in there when speaking the quotes, but I do feel it is necessary to read things word by word, not necessarily censor myself. I'm not going to say it just out of saying it, but if it is necessary to uh, a reading such as it was to this, when Dr. King was pointing out how that particular sheriff acted, I feel it is necessary. So, but Dr. King is pushing for the right to vote by African Americans. And he is pushing President Lyndon Johnson, saying, we need this. This needs to happen now. We cannot piece by piece. We have shown we are not afraid, but we need your support. We need you to do your job on that side, because we cannot do this alone. And he points out, saying, the acts passed so far, they help, but there are delaying tactics to keep it from really having the effect it should have, enacted by segregationists. And one thing I do need to point out that I hear a lot from right wingers, Dr. King wasn't for all this stuff. He was liberal. He was pushing for Medicare. I'm sure he would have pushed for health care for all. He would have been a proponent for Medicare for all today if he were still alive. He were pushing all these things to help everybody. He said it was not just the Negro populations, but also the whites and Negroes, that, you know, these acts help, better opportunities, uh, health care for everyone. It's Dr. King believed in helping the average person. And if the laws were needed to do that, that's what he believed in. So, yes, he believed in certain uses of social democracy. But I see a lot of people, he wouldn't believe in that. Read what he says. He believed in it. But yeah, that will be it for now. As always, educate thyself, read, study, learn, think. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.